Welcome to the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast, presented by the Beef Cattle Research Council, the most popular content from beefresearch.ca, available on the go. Before we get into this week's episode, a quick message from the BCRC. The objective of harvesting any type of forage for storage is to preserve feed resources at their nutritional peak in order to provide winter feed for livestock when grazing is not feasible or accessible. It is essential to harvest forage at the appropriate time based upon nutritional quality, forage yield, and weather conditions, and then store it properly to reduce losses. Feed is the major input cost in cattle production. Therefore, producers must evaluate the cost of production for all storage forage systems. To learn more about preserving and storing forages, click the link in the show notes. This episode features the BCRC Science Director, Dr. Reynold Bergen.
Hi there, I'm Reynold. This Research on the Record article originally appeared in the November 2024 issue of Canadian Cattleman magazine. It's been reposted on the beefresearch.ca site with the publisher's permission. And today we're going to talk about where corn fits in Western Canadian feedlot diets. Well, corn acreage is expanding across Canada. In Ontario and Quebec, where they've got the temperatures, the day length, and the moisture to allow predictable corn yields and feed quality, there are about 25 acres of corn for every acre of barley. The balance is the other way around. In the prairies, there's about 8 acres of barley for every acre of corn. But private breeding companies are really busy developing short season corn varieties and production strategies to go along with it that'll better suit the Western Canada's challenging climate and shorter growing season. Now, corn can be ensiled in a few different ways. You can ensile it as ground high moisture corn to make a really high starch, high energy feed source. It can be made into whole plant silage for a moderate energy source of fiber. And it can also be ensiled as snaplage. And what snaplage is silage that's made out of not the whole plant, but the entire ear of the corn, including the shank and the cob and the husk and the grain, and that all gets chopped up and turned into silage. And so snaplage has an energy content somewhere in between high moisture corn and traditional silage. So a team of researchers led by the University of Saskatchewan's Greg Penner ran a trial using these 3 different forms of ensiled corn to partially replace barley in feedlot finishing diets. And again, the scientific paper is listed in the print and online versions if you want to dig into the gory details. So what did they do? Well, they backgrounded a total of 320 crossbred steers. They started out at about 1,160 pounds. And then once they were done backgrounding, they reached that weight. They put them on 4 different finishing diets in a small pen trial with 10 head per pen. So they did this in 2 consecutive years, so 2020, 2021. And the 4 diets they used were designed to find out what would happen when they replaced barley silage and barley grain that was using CDC Austenson barley. When they replaced the barley with Pioneer 7202 AM dent corn silage, high moisture grain, or snaplage. So what did these diets look like? Well, the traditional control finishing diet contained 10% barley silage and 88% rolled barley that had been rolled to a processing index of 65%. The second diet completely replaced the barley silage with corn silage. So it had 10% corn silage and 88% rolled barley. The third diet contain 10% barley silage, but then equal amounts, so 44% each of rolled barley and ground high moisture corn. And the fourth diet contained 20% corn snaplage. And so that entirely replaced the barley silage, and then some of the barley grain, got that down to 77%. So the point was to make sure that the dietary starch concentration was similar across all 4 diets. And then the rest of the diet was limestone, urea, a mineral vitamin supplement, and so on. So these steers were finished for 99 days in year 1, 72 days in year 2, and they measured live weights, average daily gain, feed intake, gain to feed, fecal starch content, liver abscesses, and carcass data on all of these cattle. So here's what they learned. In terms of growth performance, the dry matter intakes, finished weights, average daily gains, and gain to feed of the steers fed the traditional barley-based control diet were not statistically different than any of the 3 corn diets. Now, the fecal starch levels were really low in this study, but it was higher in the steers fed barley and high moisture corn than in the control diet. In terms of carcass measurements, the steers that were fed the barley and the high moisture corn diet had statistically heavier hot carcass weights, about 11 pounds heavier, and a 1% higher dressing percentage than the control traditional barley-based steers. So that translated into a carcass adjusted final live weights that were 20 pounds heavier and average daily gains that were about 1/3 of a pound per day greater than the barley-based traditional control diet. So that suggests that the higher starch level of the barley and high moisture corn diet was enough to offset the starch that got lost in the feces while still promoting greater carcass weights. And they didn't see any differences in yield or quality grades among the 4 diets. In terms of liver abscesses, overall, 74% of cattle had minor or severe liver abscesses, and that was the same across all 4 diets. But specifically in terms of the severe liver abscesses, they were 16 percentage points lower in steers that were fed the barley grain and snaplage diet than in the steers that were fed the barley-based control diet. And so that was attributed to the higher physically effective fiber content in the snaplage diet, and that might have helped to maintain rumen health a little better and moderate rumen pH, because both of those things are important in terms of avoiding liver abscesses. So the bottom line is that replacing barley silage with corn silage, or entirely replacing the barley silage and some rolled barley with corn snaplage, didn't have any negative effects on steer performance or carcass value. And replacing some of the rolled barley with high moisture corn produced some benefits. So what might this mean to you? Probably nothing if you're in Eastern Canada, because corn is standard practice out there. But if you're new to growing and feeding corn in Western Canada, it's important to remember that varieties and growing conditions really matter. High moisture corn typically has a higher starch content than barley. The dent corn varieties, like the ones they used here, typically have more digestible protein and starch than the flint corn varieties. Now, the dent corn is more commonly grown in the US and Eastern Canada. Most of the short season corn that's grown in Western Canada is a flint corn. But starch contents and yields will drop when corn is drought stressed, like it was in this study, not surprisingly. In fact, the drought was so severe in 2021 that neither the corn silage nor snaplage could be produced. And in the second year, that study had to rely on corn silage and snaplage that was left over from 2020. In contrast, barley grain and silage were successfully grown in both years of the study. So corn has significant potential in Western Canada's feedlot sector, but there is more work to do to breed the production risk out of this crop. We have more information and resources about using corn in feedlot diets under the Feed Efficiency and Utilization page at www.beefresearch.ca.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can find all relevant links and information at beefresearch.ca or in the show notes. The Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and strives for excellence in the production of Canadian beef, cattle, and forage through research, innovation, and extension. Tune in every Tuesday as the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast delivers straightforward insights, expert information, and a wealth of practical knowledge for Canadian beef producers. Subscribe now.